Yeah, the information that's astoundingly being given by extraterrestrials in the Billy Meyer case in Switzerland, he has quotes that he's provided where they literally explain that criminality can be rooted out technologically. And when I read that, I was very intrigued and didn't understand at first. And of course, as I learned more and I put together my ideas concerning the pyramids, I realized that the underlying connections of consciousness are what dictates how souls choose bodies in the reincarnation process. And so if you resonate a fetus with certain high resonance frequencies, then you alleviate the dissonance that low-level souls look to connect with. So, for example, if a low-level soul is looking to come into our reality, they would bond with low-level, low-resonance individuals, for example, people who are psychopathic, or so, for example, genetic lines where for generations there's been a dominant gene of psychopathy in the family, or low-resonance beings can reincarnate through vehicles created in situations where one of the couple is psychopathic, and the second person in the couple has a recessive psychopathic trait. So the genetics of, inheritance of psychopathy is not well studied, but certainly we know from looking at eye color that, recessive traits pop up here and there where you wouldn't expect them. And it seems to me in the psychological study of psychopathy, that's not exactly applied, because most of the talk about is psychopathy genetic or not doesn't focus on recessive traits versus dominant traits. So I think certainly it must be, and we need to, advance the science a little further, because this is not a, recessive versus dominant traits is not a new concept at all.
That's an interest. Sorry, this is Jules again, Alex. That's an interesting thought, and I just wanted to see what your thoughts were, having what you just said there in regards to, possibly the extraordinary effects of the center of the galaxy and other stuff affecting people's magnetic field, which makes them disturbed, as opposed to having disturbed people on this earth because of their karma and their evolution in their spiritual life. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think certainly the underlying cause is a strange one, and I think many people may have a hard time putting together two and two when I give this next concept that I've put together. But to me, it does explain the reality of psychopathy in the world that we see today. And I've been reading a lot of interesting channeled material and things, Edgar Casey and things about the Atlanteans to try to discover what kind of karma they may have created that we find ourselves in a situation today where we're surrounded by their ancient temples, which we can't replicate and can't use. I find that extremely fascinating. And so looking at that question, I've basically come to the conclusion that the ancient lore surrounding the idea that the Atlanteans had created a genetically modified slave race to be their, warriors or workers or what have you, that this may have occurred by the mixing of pig genes and human genes, and that in fact the scrambling of the situation and the chaos that ensued after the fall of Atlantis allowed this slave class that was created to basically regroup and create strong genetic lines that were strong in psychopathy, as like attracts like, and basically undermine human history for, a dozen or more, in thousands of years. So 12,900 years may be, is a date that I've zeroed in on that may be close to the fall of Atlantis. And I believe that since that time, we've been in a very dark period where this low level of consciousness that was, created in many genetic lines by the Atlanteans has now taken power and subverted human consciousness. And of course, if you imagine being in the elevated spiritual state where you can see auras, you know that none of the psychopaths that are standing up on podiums and, pretending to be moral people, none of that would wash, because everyone would see that the colors of these people's aura is not reflecting that the fact that they believe even what they're saying, or that they understand what they're saying. So, when people tell me they see auras nowadays, well, I understand that not to be part of the learning cycle that most of humanity is in. And those of us who may have experiences with auras are seeing glimpses of a future reality which we'll all be a part of. But the acoustic changes may dictate that these low resonance beings may not be able to hold frequency in the new reality that's coming. So I believe 2012 will be, the culmination of what we already see beginning, where we see riots worldwide with government policies reflecting complete psychopathic, worldview, where the average person will not adhere anymore to this because the average person's consciousness and their telepathic ability is able to identify these changes and identify the fact that so-called leaders are doing nothing of the sort.
So, Alex, when we look at Egyptians with elongated heads, in the past people have thought that maybe they had alien DNA. So do you think they're natural DNA, or are they mixed?
Well, I think what's interesting is that the technology, we have the Orion pyramids at the Giza Plateau, and they're called, they're now, I refer to that in my writings with that name because of the work of Robert Bauval and the correspondence to the Orion's Belt constellation. So I think that that's the symbolism. Well, first of all, the word itself, or ion, in the languages we have on Earth today, those root words correspond to the ionization of gold. So that in itself corresponds to the technology as I've been speaking about it in the pyramids. But further, it also references this star pattern, and I believe that this technology is an extraterrestrial technology that was brought to Earth, and I'm speaking of the pyramid technology itself. And I believe that it's a direct, it's like a system of ground-based towers for creating the enhanced conditions for the ionization of plasma ships. So that's a whole other topic in itself.
Okay.
But, certainly the changes that are engendered in humans who live in those acoustic and luminous high energy conditions inside the pyramids, they come from all walks of life the further back you go in history. And I would say that the Egyptians inherited those ancient structures from a previous Atlantean source, and that in fact the traditions of the Egyptians were influenced by more ancient Sanskrit Kundalini tradition, which is why we see horizontal stripes on the pharaoh's dress, which I believe corresponds to the Kundalini cobra, or the symbolism of the activation of the Kundalini moving up to spine. And of course, they have the Kundalini symbol coming out of the third eye chakra of the pharaohs of Egypt as well in their sarcophagi. So I think all that symbolism definitely shows us that it's the same results. The Egyptians were speaking culturally the same results that we have from laboratory experiments, and the Mayans themselves telling us that it's from the coatl in every cell of every living being. And I think that directly tells us that anyone who lives in the sacred lifestyle in the pyramids will have an augmentation of their genetic code as well as their body. And certainly the cranial elongation does seem to be an elitist technology because it differentiates those leaders from others. But I would suggest that was more an abuse of the technology during the Egyptian epoch, and that the ancient Sanskrit tradition involved a more balanced enhancement of the whole brain, especially the occipital lobe, which you'll see in the Egyptian elongated skulls. The occipital is not very expanded, whereas, in fact, in the Mayan crystal skull called the Mitchell-Hedges skull, this crystal skull shows a very, very open and extended occipital region at the back and the bottom of the skull. So to me, that skull and the shape of that crystal skull represents a more ancient, authentic source of this psychoacoustic cranial enhancement.
Wow, that's wonderful. My next question is, I was listening to Ralph Ring, who said he worked with Otis Carr, who said he was a student of Tesla's. And Ring said that Carr did develop a flying machine using Tesla's theories. He actually rode in the flying machine, but experienced cognitive dissonance of some sort. He and the other men were told to hold positive thoughts and focus on a light which changed colors, but they could not remember the actual flight until later. They were waiting for the experiment to start when Carr told them it was over and they could get out of the machine. So then they asked, what happened? Carr told them to look in their pockets, which had been empty when they started the experiment, and each of them had rocks and twigs and other things they picked up when the machine flew to another location. It took them till later to actually remember the flight. Why would the energies from Tesla's machine cause this cognitive dissonance?
That's a very good question, and I don't have an answer for you because there's no physics being related in what's being described in the Ring and Carr story. So I've heard this one myself years ago, and I was very intrigued at first, but as they went on with their story, I realized that there's no details that can be analyzed from a scientific viewpoint.
Okay.
As I understand it, the acoustic levitation of these objects occurs, and Tesla had developed this technology after his research with standing waves. It occurs because of multi-frequency driving of a resonant cavity, or a ship, for example, or a temple structure or chamber. So in the descriptions that were given, they're so vague, and they're given like it's a hypnosis machine, which for me is what the U.S. government would like people to have when they investigate Tesla's technologies and consider his ideas. So I would suggest that this, the whole tale about cognitive dissonance and hypnosis about what actually happened is actually what the author of these tales is trying to induce in the listener. So I paid them very little attention, and I would encourage people to look into the actual physics papers that I include in my website so that they don't have to listen to such drivel without details, expecting it to have some relevance to them. Obviously, there's no relevance to what that story is providing because no one remembers anything, and they may not have even been there except they had grass in their pockets. Now, that's some unexplainable stuff right there, and I have no way to explain it either.
Okay. I think Jules has a question.
Yes, Green Meadow. Sorry, just one moment. There's just some knocking in the background. Sorry about that. Alex, in regards to your levitation, acoustic levitation, I was just wondering, obviously monks, we've heard that monks can levitate objects, so they're the source of their levitation by the noise that they make through their instruments. But obviously you can't levitate yourself in that same situation. So it's more you'd have to create a levitation field around you to be able to levitate the things. Is that the way of thinking? Well,
the levitation field is none other than the electromagnetic field surrounding an object. So the question of what can and cannot be levitated really has to do with the qualities of the materials in those objects. So when we speak about levitating stones, obviously we're talking about crystalline stones. And I believe that the yogic practices of ancient India and elsewhere around the world in association with sacred sites and pyramids have to do with building a coherent heart field, which of course meditation is well known for. And the best conditions for that are in fact barefoot living in contact, direct physical contact with the piezoelectric temple stones at sacred sites based on a worldwide geometric distribution pattern. So that's a lot to think about, and indeed it's a very complex ancient technology for activation that I'm able to document through my work around the world, showing the similarities at sacred sites, not only in the structures and the technologies, but as well in the cultural icons and the mandala and the different geometric symbols that are sacred to cultures around the world. So in my mind, it's a question of, like I said before, creating a temple of the body, meaning increasing the resonant index or the reverberation time or the electrical capacity of the water in the human body.